Black Horse Pub. It's Tuesday, so it must be school day. Welcome back, Kit Wood.
Thank you, Keith.
And it seems to me that the last time that we were together, I was expressing some astonishment that schools really didn't start to pick up pupils until quite late in sort of the perhaps 17th, 18th centuries.
Yes.
And you were rushing off to find out how many pupils you'd got left at Logs.
The numbers have fluctuated throughout its history. As a matter of fact, right in its early days, there probably were more than 12, but we've got no record of it. Most of those charitable foundations took in fee-paying students, pupils, as well as the endowment-funded ones, so that the master could have a few extras, I expect. So, yeah.
When did it really start to accelerate? When did it become either fashionable or popular to send your children to school?
Mid-19th century, I should say. And then, of course, it became compulsory from 1870 onwards. But it was certainly becoming popular and fashionable too.
Who was the driving factor behind compulsory education?
Well, I'm tempted to say Benjamin Disraeli because of the passage of the Second Great Reform Act, which in 1867 and came into force in 1869 and was very much widened the franchise. And Disraeli's possibly apocryphal phrase was, well, no, it's not a phrase, is it? Announcement was, we must educate our masters, and therefore work towards introducing universal and elementary education. So that...
Was he really saying we need educated voters?
Yes. One wonders if that's quite... No, sorry, stop it. Has that quite been achieved?
I think that your skepticism has got a certain amount of weight anyway.
Well, I don't always feel quite competent and au fait with all the issues to cast a vote, but I do nevertheless.
Yes.
So yes, that was... but it was very much part of that improving and reforming and, to a degree, Christian philanthropic spirit of the middle couple of quarters of the 19th century.
It wasn't until post-war Britain that we got things like the 11 plus, was it? Selecting bright children for secondary education.
Well, schools, state-funded schools had selection processes, so that, for example, in Lewis itself, the two state grammar schools were selecting their pupils from their foundation in the late 1930s. But no, you're right. The making uniform of the system of selecting pupils for selective schools at the age of 11 plus was post-war.
Good move or bad move? Controversial move?
I'd say bad, but I've got a bee in my bonnet now about the education system now, which is that there is far too much examination in that dry sense of making children sit papers. I think it can be counterproductive to imaginative and exploratory education, because very much there's a sense that people are being crammed for the next examination at various stages of testing the national curriculum, which have been recently introduced. And I think that all stemmed from that mindset has rather grown vegetably from the selection at the age of 11. I'm not sure that it's a very good thing, really.
All sorts of thoughts come into my mind. Is my worst subject at school was mathematics, but the highest mark in a GCSE, I think they're called, was mathematics, because it was thrashed into me. And some of the things that I enjoyed, I was very mediocre. I don't know if that adds some weight to your argument.
Well, I often talk to colleagues who are teaching maths. In fact, I've done it a little bit myself, and they do often point out that it is hard to get a sense of enthusiasm for the subject, which by and large they are rather fond of, through to the children, because there is this obsession with preparing them for success at the examination at the GCSE or A-level examinations. And for various reasons, some good, it does have very great importance placed on it. The fact that people should have some sort of piece of paper that shows a level of competence in, at least in numeracy.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing can be, I think can be a bit corrosive of any sense of enthusiasm for a subject.
I think it can be in media, for instance. I mean, I find that the people that are least successful are the people that come in waving a degree in media studies or in journalism or whatever. Is the piece of paper does not reflect the sort of either temperament, background, experience, or anything else that they should have to be successful. Now, and I'm got to be in my bonnet too, much as you have about yours. So I'm probably wildly wide of the mark. But that's my personal experience, and I've kicked around in this industry for almost 60 years. So perhaps I have some credibility.
Yes, you certainly do. I'm wondering if in those cases that your young or aspiring colleague waving the degree, I'm wondering if they were badly served by a poorly designed course, because learning about a subject which one's going to, as it were, wallow in, it can only be a good thing, surely, but it's got to be appropriate. It's
yes. Well, I'm not sure. I mean, you and I probably would get into debate and take opposite points of view, but it's my view that there are some subjects, of which I would include media, where you can actually get paper learning, as it were, and it doesn't really apply itself to what the real profession is like. It's a very different profession. It is interesting, for instance. I mean, this is a red herring. I'm famous for red herrings.
Oh, that's right.
But the assessment of why journalism is different now to the way it was in the 1930s, in the golden days of journalism, was that actually journalism attracted intellectuals. And that when they found things much more interesting as the world opened up, so the intellectual journalists drifted away and left the practical journalists, the bread and butter guy, and that's broadly what we've got today. Whether you find that appropriate to any principle you would have, I have no idea.
Well, I think that you're almost certainly right, but I'm sure there are intellectuals in journalism, and there are certainly very clever operatives. And I'm always very amused by the marvelous wit that sub editors show in the red tops when they come up with these. Sometimes their headlines are absolutely inspiring.
Yes.
That is a gift, isn't it? And I
Yes.
don't think it can come from book learning.
No.
Strangely enough, just before Keith and I came on the air, we were discussing an expression used in the army, and it occurs to me that a good officer in the armed forces isn't one who can just fly a desk. It's somebody who's got human skills as well, and many members of other ranks, if you like, are rather scathing about officers who are book learned, as it were.
Well, I think you touched on a subject that before you actually, because Kit always ends a program and sort of like a mad professor says, "Oh, I must go and look at that," and so on, and then comes back with something totally new and exciting. But I sometimes wonder whether, in fact, you can categorize teachers as you just did the army colonel who is a desk waller, as opposed to the man who's come back from the front. I mean, teachers, the best teachers I had were the teachers who were very sort of practical and so on, rather than academic. But that was because I wasn't academic. I mean, do you think that there are different grades of teacher?
Yes, without a doubt. What nowadays tends to be called subject knowledge is rated by people who are judging the effectiveness of teaching. Subject knowledge is important. For example, in maths, it's of no real benefit for a student to be faced with somebody who doesn't know what differentiation is when they're trying to teach it. On the other hand, teaching is a craft which doesn't depend on subject knowledge. It's perfectly possible for an effective teacher to take up a topic in a subject she or he is not particularly familiar with, and give the children some ideas, some strategies as to how to learn about it. And one of the few little dicta I remember from my teaching certificate course was a woman who said, very often if you find yourself in front of a class and you're faced with a situation that you aren't prepared for because you didn't expect that to be the matter they were supposed to be covering, if you can switch your mind to thinking, let's learn together, because as a matter of fact, I might be able to help you learn, even though I don't know it myself. Neither you as a group nor I know very much about this, but I can help you to learn about it more effectively. So I think it's got to be a mix of those two. Yes, as far as subject knowledge is concerned, it is very important, but it's if one's got very deep, wide subject knowledge, it's a temptation then to display it at the expense of helping the children to gain any at all. And, I think it's a danger one has to avoid in the profession.
Yeah. Now, you've been very kind and you indulged me. What did you dash off to discover last time?
Well, I was hoping you weren't going to ask me that, but because I can't remember, I didn't. I thought there was some suggestion that we might talk about the direction I or we saw education heading in.
Yes, I think
So
we did actually, and
I did give that some thought.
uh,
And the problem I came up against was that I find the prospects rather less than rosy, to be honest. I don't see that teaching is really heading in a particularly positive direction at the moment. I think part of the reason for that is what I touched on earlier, the excessive, rather obsessive reliance on recording, grading and recording and reporting on children and examining them and testing them, assessing their progress. As an American author said, I forget which, it wasn't Mark Twain, but it was one of those wits, said, you don't fatten pigs by weighing them. And I think it's that is rather what the tendency of the direction of the profession is towards excessive, obsessive assessment and examination. And I think it rather tramlines us.
I mean, to alter the direction of something, it's very difficult to do it if you're a lone thinker. Do you find a number of your colleagues, fellow teachers, think your way?
Well, they're all with me in grumbling about how many blooming assessments we have to set and how many times we have to enter grades, and it's a serious extra workload on us. It is a serious problem. If one does all that properly, it is quite a burden. And if I were to hold out any hope for a change, it would be that I think it will rather depend on future education secretaries, because every one of them seems to think that it's important to intervene and make a change and introduce an additional layer of recording. And this interference from the Department for Education has been very, very inducive of stress among the profession, I'm afraid to say. If you could just back off, it would be.
Is it actually the secretary themselves, or is it the civil servants who apply what is determined at the political level?
I think it's the system, and I'd be very loath to recommend a longer period of office for a government between elections. I think it's about right. 5 years, 4 or 5 years is about right. But the problem with that, and the increasing problem recently of the fact that people don't stay in post even within the duration of an administration, they keep being reshuffled out of it or having to nip off in disgrace. And it's just so unsettling. I think education should be, it's a funny thing to say, I think it should be taken out of politics. And perhaps there should be more responsibility than less given to the civil service. And there should be a presumption, I think, among education policymakers that they leave things alone unless there's a really, really good reason why not to.
I was going to ask you if you had thoughts about which direction it should go. Every bone in my body, being a journalist, says to take as much away as you possibly can from the civil service. But how would you see it working?
Sometimes there have been ministries which haven't really existed, that maybe prime ministers have sometimes taken on another portfolio and rather left it to gather dust. That's how I see it working. appoint somebody who's not really very interested in doing the job as Secretary of State for Education. Let that person just
get on with other things, and yes,
go to receptions.
Looking back at the record of various education ministers and those under them in the permanent part of governments, have you seen any what I would call golden years of this sort of thing working?
Now I've forgotten the name of the bloke who, in the must have been right at the end of Jim Callaghan's period, I think. I forget who was Education Secretary at that point, but I believe he was called Baker, actually, not Norman, who gave us a decent pay increase. And for a while then, the profession was properly paid.
Right.
I don't think we are at the moment. I don't think we're adequately rewarded financially.
Yeah, I mean, that's always a problem, isn't it? I very briefly taught, actually, in a gap year from university, and I can remember it was at my old school, my former masters, and then my colleagues saying, "I've just heard that the headmaster is going to retire," and another chap said, "Why do you think that is?" And said, "Perhaps he sees the way things are going to go." Now that would be about 1961 or so. Was there a seed change around that time?
It was the speeding up of a process that had already begun. I think it was the move towards much wider acceptability of co-educational education, which of course is excellent. It's and towards comprehensive education, which, if it works properly, if it's properly funded and resourced, and importantly, it has the best quality professionals working in it, it can be a very effective way of doing it. So yes, that came about. I think the fear that your old headmaster felt was realised in many cases, because those things didn't happen, because the better quality teaching staff not finding themselves rewarded either in what they were being asked to do or in how they were remunerated, left state education towards the end of the 60s, certainly. And quality was patchy. Quality was distinctly patchy. In Lewis, I think we've been lucky. I would say this, wouldn't I? Because I am one, founder member of Priory. I think we've been very lucky in the co-educational comprehensive school in Lewis, Priory School. It's always been really pretty good. We're very lucky from that point of view.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I haven't been close to education in Lewis at all, but I always have this impression that people are rather proud of the schools that we have here, and they've done a rather superior job.
Yes, that's true. It's partly the geographical location. I think we have people who are interested in education in a place which has got so many educational establishments, including two excellent universities. The whole ethos of education is woven into our society, and I think the profession is better respected and better treated here than in many other parts of the country.
But your suggestion that perhaps we began to tread water. Is that locally, or is it generally right across the country, right across the profession?
Well, it depends what you mean by that, because I mean, in a way, treading water is not a bad thing, is it? What we have to remember always in teaching is that it is actually new, and it is exciting, or it should be, for every customer, as it were. The actual user of the service, the pupil, the student, comes to something that they haven't experienced before. So it doesn't necessarily need overhauling and changing if the system is in fact working. Everybody experiences education, which I suppose is why so many people feel that they're experts on it. But it's it's not necessary to change it if it's working well.
I sense a little edge of either frustration or worry that things weren't moving in quite the right direction. When you mentioned these things 10 minutes ago.
Yes, I think you did correctly sense that. No, I think that people are in various levels of authority, from the Department for Education downwards, are meddling and increasing the workload on teachers and the administrative staff in schools to a degree that is quite unnecessary and very stressful. And I wish they'd stop. Obviously, pupils have to be assessed, and obviously their progress and the effectiveness of the learning that's taking place in a school has to be monitored. Inspections have to take place, although I really feel that they should be no-notice inspections, and so that heads and senior staff aren't put through all that stress of knowing that there's an inspection coming up, and that we should just be, sorry to nick Mr. Johnson's phrase, but we should be oven ready at every point for the inspectors to walk through the front door, and so that we don't have to have that terrible, well, we've seen recently, haven't we, tragic impact of inspections. But yes, the monitoring needs to take place.
Yes. I mean, I don't know if there's a parallel or not, but is in running this very small but nonetheless significant television operation is it obviously has to have administration, and some of it comes from government departments. And I get very frustrated and sort of mutter to myself, I should be getting on with making television programs. Is it that sort of frustration that that you're finding in the amongst your colleagues and teachers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. They're finding themselves. I mean, we're very lucky at the old grammar school because we have small class sizes, very highly motivated pupils by and large, very supportive parent body, and so we're cushioned to some extent. But nevertheless, even in our rather comfortable little setup, colleagues find themselves report themselves to be tired when they're being expected to teach because of the extra workload that's been placed upon them. And that's no good at all. A tired operative at the chalk face is useless. It's useless. It's a performance. It's 8 or 9 shows a day, and one can't do that tired.
Yeah.
And it's a lonely job as well. You can't do that if you're tired. Stand up and perform, as well as juggling all the other things that I feel are important to the core of the profession's purpose. The the being to some extent familiar with the nature of social work. Obviously, one doesn't get involved in detailed cases, but one has to know about that world on some occasions. One has to be prepared to be an agony aunt, an arbiter in case of disputes, a shoulder to cry on. One has to do all these things vis-a-vis the students in front of us. But all the extra things are, I feel, quite negative for the profession. Sorry, I'm waffling on a bit. Rather, as we hear reported from police officers,
yes.
That in fact they themselves are very frustrated because they realise that that their interaction with the public is less than optimal because they're being weighed down with all this the administrative work that's been generated and has been loaded on them.
Another red herring or an aside or whatever is one of my grandsons. I have two grandsons. The younger one actually teaches socially challenged pupils. But he actually has a mild case of Asperger's himself, and feels that this helps him relate. I would imagine that if he got a fierce case, it might not work. But as it is, he seems to be very successful. Keeps on getting promoted. But I think I'm understanding what you're saying. But Kit, if the Prime Minister walked in through the door and said, "I've been listening to your broadcast, right? Here you are. Here's a brief. Is start to work on throwing the whole thing into the air and coming to me with a recommendation for change." What would you do?
I should say, take away the. I think it's particularly the SATs test at the end of the primary years that puts so much pressure on those youngsters of 10 and 11 years old and their teachers. It's totally unnecessary. There is no selection moving into the secondary sector anymore. And it's just it's a level of a burden which is unnecessary and disruptive of everybody's morale. Get rid of that. Stop meddling in the detailed policy that schools follow. Let them be judged on the outcome of the public exams that the children take at 15 plus and 17 plus. Everything else should be left to the discretion of the school itself. In other words, wind back. That's what I'd recommend. Oh, and by the way, put a reasonable amount of money into repairing the structures and halting the dreadfully short-sighted policy of sticking houses up on the playing fields.
Oh, yes.
And selling those off. So it isn't a single thing. But so I think the most important thing is just give us enough money, both the profession and the structures, and stop interfering.
Now, there are always different points of view in every profession. I know that people in media fight like cat and dog over what we should do. And because I've been a rebel, I've probably had fought all my life. But you just explained with great clarity what you would do. But there will be people within your profession that say, another new way of doing things, and so on. So perhaps because they're worn down the old one, but there will be people who will be naysayers. So what sort of fight do you think that you would have to implement some of the things you just suggested?
Well, I should say, yeah, I certainly would have a fight if I were to be made Secretary of State for Education. I'm not open to that offer, by the way. It's far too annoying. I should think they'd rather welcome it if we got rid of some of these layers of assessment and examination that pile so much pressure on them. No, but there would be people who say that it's important to retain that monitoring. And no doubt there would be, if that liberalisation of the detailed policy that a school adopts were to take place, there would be some schools that would continue to feel it important to monitor and to assess children's progress. And I'm sure every school would, but maybe in a slightly less formal and less time-consuming format.
How are we doing on time? We've got time left. We've only been here 36 minutes. I just remembered. I was discussing with Kit why I'm called Mr. Keith. A lot of people call me Mr. Keith. It's mostly because I've spent a lot of time abroad and people can't pronounce my name. Hayes, they gave Hyas and all sorts of things, so they call me Mr. Keith. But I liked the Mr. Tibbs thing. They call me Mr. Tibbs, and I just remembered the name of the actor, Sidney Poitier.
Oh, yes.
Yes, who actually played with Lulu, I think, is a temporary teacher in an East End London school. Now, even today, I'm quite sure that there are huge differences between the sort of education that Logs provides, for instance, and perhaps an East End London, Tower Hamlets school.
Yes.
How would you sort of find some commonality between those different types of educational organizations?
Well, a school whose population is drawn from members of community in a deprived area, particularly the inner city areas, does face extra challenges. There's a dreadful disparity between the exam success rate at those important stages of GCSE and A-level. In fact, in many areas of the inner cities, very few children go on to any sort of further education, and it I'm afraid to say needs resourcing properly. I think the resources that the teaching budget has at its disposal ought to be targeted and given to those at the point of the greatest need. Obviously, the old grammar school is a fee-paying school, so it funds itself. But as far as state provision is concerned, the outcome for a youngster going to the Priory here or going to schools in quite near neighbouring schools in the Brighton and Hove conurbation or in Crawley and so on, it's very different. It's radically different, and they just need resource so that they can. They've got enough staff to intervene, to employ people like your grandson to take small groups of children to help them to catch up. That sort of thing doesn't seem to be at the front of government policy. You may remember something that came and went like a will-o'-the-wisp, the idea that money would be provided to help children who had lost effectively 2 years of education because of the pandemic lockdowns. Yeah. And that we never really saw the colour of that. It was very important that should happen, but it didn't. It's a question you've got to fund properly the provision of a proper start, a proper opportunity for children in deprived areas. You've got to staff those schools with properly qualified and properly rewarded professionals. Otherwise, it'll just perpetuate, I'm afraid.
Politicians do tend to react to what their constituents are either telling them or that they feel from them, right or wrong. Do you think that the fact that the blush has gone off the rose for we will do this for the pandemic, we will do that for the pandemic, reflects general feeling?
Well, I think on an emotional level, we all want to try to forget it and blank it, don't we? It was so horrible. But in education, it has distinctly had an impact. It has distinctly, the current cohort of children taking their exams missed effectively 2 years of socialization, of learning by interacting with a real human and with each other. And it's been dreadfully damaging for them, even in good old Lewis, in the schools in Lewis and the more affluent parts of the southeast. Even there, it's had a terribly negative impact on them. And how much worse that's been for youngsters in the poorer areas of the country. Yeah. It really, I think it's been overlooked rather cruelly, really, for those youngsters.
I'm a communicator, and I must confess is that the urgency has not sort of overwhelmed me. But if I don't understand, first of all, how are you going to make me understand the effects that it had on youngsters? And then how are you going to persuade me that I should be spending more time and more effort in helping this particular sector?
There's it's slightly been redressed, but only slightly. There's a thing called shrinkflation, isn't there? When your Kit Kat bar or something that has about 50 grams less chocolate in it, but the price stays the same. And I think that's rather happened with the grade boundaries in public exams, and it certainly did. The exams for the cohort who were just coming up to their GCSEs, for example, in 2021, 2022, were distinctly and deliberately lowered, and they're only just being raised again. They were raised again a bit last year, and the result is that for the first time, we didn't have a significant improvement in the number of people achieving the higher grades. So it is possible to measure it. It is possible to quantify the loss of effective learning that those children have been subjected to. Not absolutely scientifically, but it is possible to be pretty decisively capable of proving it. But no, I suppose because it's our nature, we as a profession don't go around talking to you, members of the public, beating drums and saying, look, the school children are suffering and so on. We try to make up for it, try to make amends, try to help them on the quiet, and tend not to blow our own trumpets, really, or perhaps wrongly. I don't think we adequately advocate for these frankly damaged youngsters.
Yeah. Well, initially I invited you on because I I'm fascinated by the history of Lewis and how important logs is to it. But as we've gone along with this program, so we've started to talk more about the needs of education and some of your ideas. And let's face it, I mean, you're a bit like me. You're nowhere near as old as I am, but I mean, you've been in the teaching profession for an entire career, and so you are, in my view, an expert. And I hope that what will happen is that this program will turn into a is it bi-monthly or bi-weekly? Once every other week, anyway, the way that it is at the moment. I hope that it'll keep going. And I hope that you will start to bring some of your considerable thinking on. But it is. I mean, I'm happy that I've got, for instance, barristers and teachers and so on involved in this, so that we can make a difference. And this isn't just a rich man's toy. First of all, I'm not rich. And secondly, I've never seen it as a toy. And I think that your contribution is so valuable that I hope that we can actually turn it into perhaps where you may well want to bring on some of your colleagues. Or you may well want to interview somebody from the Department of Education, which we can do all those things with this wonderful software that we've got. And I hope that we'll do that. I hope that together we'll actually develop something where people will say, God, if you want to find out what the hell's happening in education, listen and watch Kit Wood. Because that to me would help me feel more fulfilled. Selfish, perhaps, but nonetheless. I mean, what we've talked about today has been really quite exciting for me, and I hope that we'll continue to carry on with this. We have 47 minutes, 2 minutes over 3/4 of an hour. Kit, thank you, and you'll be back in 2 weeks' time.
I'm afraid not. No, I'm away at Easter, so.
Oh, it's a holiday.
Yes.
Yes. Now, the interesting thing is that Mirador broadcasts every weekday, but we do take public holidays, and actually, the reason for that is that because we do understand our own businesses, people's viewing habits change totally on holidays and weekends, and while we would like to provide a service to them, it takes a lot of money, exactly what you're talking about, to completely alter what you do on those days. So it may be that we will actually be closed down, and we won't be back for ourselves on that day. So will you let me know the day that you're going to return? But yes. But I do hope that you'll return.
I'd love to. Yes, thank you, Keith.
Okay, let's see what time is it? Oh, it's coming up, and actually we're just under the wire, so that Declan can open his pub.
Excellent.
I'm always aware that I must not be broadcasting when people are walking through the front door too. Okay, well, we'll be back tomorrow morning, and I think that it's one of the B's, the barrister, Philip Meredith, and I think he'll have the lovely Susie with him, and they will kick off at 8 o'clock. So do join us then. And for the moment, toodle pip. We've got backgrounds there. We need. There we go.